everything that I knew and thought about autism and it was genetic or a genetic abnormality, I was convinced that my son was going to have some type of genetic abnormality.
Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. Have you heard the phrase, autism is genetic? There's nothing you can do about it. Your kid is just this way and you just have to accept it. These are their gut issues. These are their immune system issues. These are their social emotional issues. These are their speech issues. You name it, just learn to live with it. Is that what you've been told is the story, therefore, for your family? Spoiler alert, that's absolutely not true. Autism is not solely genetic. We've covered that so many times here on this podcast, but I've got a special guest, and man, do I mean that. Like a real kick-ass, help change your life guest on this one with Greer McGuinness from the Biomedical Healing for Kids. She is a registered dietitian, a certified detox specialist, and a master herbalist. And just pause right there. I mean, that's a really rad, you know how much I like to have fun. Master herbalist? I mean, I feel like that, if I'm rolling into like a party or like it's my kids, Christmas party at their school and somebody's like, oh, what do you do? I'm putting that one first because it just is and sounds so and it is. That's exactly who Greer is, how she is. And her story, as we'll kick this podcast episode off with, is actually what just took her educational, professional expertise to not just another level where she went out and sought more training like we just talked about, but most importantly, sought who, which families, and which specialty would she step into. It was her son's story after a major regression to autism at age 19 months that really, like mine, kicked off her pursuit into this specialty. And that's why I feel like when it comes, there is a lot of biomedical doctors, providers, certified this and certified that out there in the world, everybody. There's not a lot of providers in this autism community and in the biomedical community and on Instagram and on Facebook who have as much real life experience as folks like Greer do, and specifically that Greer does. And I know that isn't the story for every practitioner, and I know many practitioners, whether it's pediatric chiropractors or biomedical integrative, practitioners who their kiddos did not go through the storm and did not struggle, and it's just their path, their expertise, and they're really freaking good at helping your family. But even though it's me and Greer that we're talking about, who both have had this experience, I don't have the perfect words to tell you, but there's something different that when you've gone through it as a parent and you do the job as a provider, there's just kind of a trump card. There's just a level of compassion. There's just a level of relatability. There's just a level of knowing what the real secret cheat codes are to healing that you don't get in books and you don't get in curriculums and you don't get in standard education that you do get in, I guess, what do they call it? The hard knocks of real life. There's nobody tougher. There's nobody funnier. There's nobody that I enjoy talking to more about this stuff than Greer. So let's get into this one. You're going to love it. All right, Greer, this, we had very fast moving conversations in person down in Orlando with our hope dealing and healing besties with Beth and Documenting Hope. I've spoken a lot about that here on the podcast, and Beth was one of our first guests, and then many other great presenters were there. So we've been able to chat, obviously, Instagram DMs, real quick in the hallway down in Orlando, but this chat is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. And so I know I already did my intro to you, but before I ask the question, I think as you're about to go through you and your kiddos and your family's incredible story here is where I want you to start us off. Knowing that from following your content, loving your content and tapping into your story, I think that's why I love you so much because truth be told, I'm pretty judgy, and I'm going to use that word in a good context here, okay, my friend? Been around for 17 years, studying it for 20 years, in this biomedical, neurophysiological, natural health healing world. And so it's not all that different than most other worlds where there's just people who have it. There's just people who care so stinking much that when they step into their training and they step into their service and they step into the care they provide families, there's a level with which some people deliver it that most don't. And I've always felt like the secret sauce, and it's probably, okay, for me, I know, I can't speak for you, it's definitely not the path we would have chosen many years ago if we didn't have to, but the secret sauce to really doing a dang good job, no matter what kind of provider you are, is when you've lived through it, right? Yourself, your own health, or your kiddos' health. So can you start with us there? And actually, if I can be a little bit specific to my chronological question, I'd love to go back to your kiddos, even into the fertility, pregnancy. You know me and my perfect storm stuff, right? So even prior to the regression, now that you've studied it and we've chatted and all the other sort of stuff, I just wonder if there's anything to that part of the story, please let us have it. And then let it rip. How did you really, really get into this work that you do?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, so funny story, I actually used to wrestle. And I actually went to college on an all-female team to wrestle, and I was going to the Olympics. That was, I was a wrestler to watch out for. Female wrestling was very new and up and coming at that time. And I got injured within 3 months of me being in college, and my wrestling career was then over. So I had to pivot. And it was very interesting because I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. So just thought I was going to wrestle for the rest of my life and be a coach and things like that. And I had a heart-to-heart conversation with my sister, who actually happened to be a social worker. And she said, you've always been into nutrition. Why don't you become a dietitian? And I said, what's that? I had no idea what that was. And so she kind of explained to me, she was working as a social worker in a hospital. So she told me what dietitians do. So I thought this was really interesting because it really did fit right up my alley of what I wanted to do, or what I think would have been a great path for me. So, going and being Western medicine trained, I thought I was always learning the correct way of things. I thought everybody else was misinformed. I thought I was the only person that really understood the proper interventions, the proper, ways of helping people and medically.
Because real quick, conventional dietitian training is super medical, right?
Yeah, we do. We take all the same undergraduate classes as doctors and nurses. So we're in the same exact undergraduate programs, and then we pivot. Actually, dietitians go to school longer than nurses do.
Yep.
So we actually have to do 4 years of undergrad, then we have to do a year of internship, and then we have to sit for our boards exam. Okay. So it is, and now they require a master's degree. I do have a master's degree in nutritional health with a focus on epidemiology, but that is something that dietitians now, if they want to become dietitians, they do need now a 4-year a master's program degree. So when I met my husband and we decided to have children, I really didn't think much of it. I just thought I was eating well. I thought I was healthy, but I had really bad hyperemesis during my pregnancy, and that nearly killed me. So, I was petrified of getting pregnant ever again after that, because it was just, I couldn't start my morning off unless I threw up every morning. So that's how I started my day. And then what was interesting, and I've actually talked to a couple people, and I was actually talking to a couple people at this conference, I wound up with PUPS. And I don't know if you've ever heard of PUPS. It's called PUPPS. It's a very long name, and the abbreviation is PUPS. But it's actually a pregnancy rash that happens with your DNA and the child's DNA apparently don't mix or mesh well. A lot of times it's very common in twins, first twin births or first boy births. And it literally was on 90% of my body. It was just a giant rash, and it was horrific. I mean, I have never encountered anything like that. It's itchy, it's uncomfortable, and it started around, I want to say around 34, 35 weeks. So it was towards the end of my pregnancy, when a lot of the times it happens at the beginning of the pregnancy, or within, at least the first trimester, and then it continues. So I didn't think really anything of that. You know, when my husband and I got pregnant very quickly with my son, it only took like 3 months. Like we thought it was going to take a lot longer. I don't know why I had that in my head. I just figured I would never get pregnant. I don't know why. But yeah, after he was born at a day shy of 39 weeks, and I think it was because of the stress on my body from that pups, because it was just, I wasn't sleeping, I was uncomfortable, I was miserable, like just nothing, you know, creams didn't work, you know, thing. So I kind of always think that my water broke and he came naturally because my body was just under stress, which was really unfortunate. It was really not anything that, you know, as a first birthing experience is, you know, it was just, I really wish I would have had like a midwife or a doula or somebody to help and support me during that time. You know, I pushed for 3 hours. The cord was wrapped around his neck. Like it was just one of those types of birthing experiences that you have to really work through and hope to God that it never happens again, because it was just so traumatic for everybody. So, you know, but he was born perfect. His Apgar scar was high. Like there was no issues with him. Like there were, you know, he was perfect. You know, he was tiny. He was 5 pounds, 9 ounces, but you know, he was perfect in every single way. And he developed normally there were no issues.
How about even in those early stages? And you probably didn't know, I'm such a case history CSI, you know, when I'm in it, I can't not go into the granular details.
No, you're fine.
How about latch and sleep and regulation those first couple of weeks? Did he have a good start?
No, we did not. We actually wound up back in the hospital because he was dehydrated because he wasn't latching correctly, but I was very busty and he was very small. So we had a really hard time with latching. You know, where I would pump and put it in a bottle for him, which was fine. The problem was every time the pups rash did go away once I gave birth. But then what happened was every time I would pump and my letdown reflex would come out, the pups would start again and I would break out in an entire rash every single time. And,
well, that's interesting that you share that. I did not know that about it. So my very first patient, literally patient family. So, was my attorney's wife. So I bought a building that our practice was going to, that did start in, because all the way back in 2007, they did that. They actually gave, loans to people. Anyways, that's not part of the story. And so I'm never not talking about chiropractic here, my friend, all the way back then. So it's an attorney and a lawyer and a closing. So what am I chatting about at the table? Chiropractic, pregnancy, babies, right? We just had the birth of ours. So his wife had terrible back pain and this terrible unexplained rash called PUPS. And so my very first patient was literally this case, and it carried forward. Then that became my first infant patient, you know, their first daughter. And it was just this dance of when she would, you know, it would clear, and then her body would do the work that is required to produce. And then that would stress the body and kind of open that back up. And so, because that's where we dig in to his story, because every time we do see, and I'll be very brief because I want you to go, when we get into regression later on, we often, when you really, really look deep under the hood, because that first initial latching is about nutrition and it's about neurology. Now, when you pump and get it through a bottle, it's awesome because you can still get that nutrition from mom to baby. But there's that co-regulation, that physical connection that sometimes is a tough first bond to form in these exact scenarios and similar. And so sometimes that just leaves their nervous system just a little extra sensitive, right? And a little bit too that.
It was something, you know, again, you know, hindsight is 2020 now of all the things I could have done differently and should have done differently. But back then, PUPS wasn't really, it was still not well known. I mean, we still don't even know what causes it. Like we still don't. And that's so crazy. I was like in a Facebook group and all of us moms were sharing, you know, black pine tar soap and like all these other, you know, things to help. And, you know, it's unfortunate. It was just something, it was almost like a freak accident that occurred and happened. And it wasn't anything that,
No. Yes. There's
so
just not. And that's why it's tough to go back and talk about this stuff, because every parent, we get into that coulda, shoulda, but it's wild how much that prepares us to be able to take care of our kiddos when they have these challenges. And then I think for those of us, and you are just a rock star at this, called to help other families. It's, again, it's the path we wouldn't have chosen, but it's the path that makes us just a good bit extra effective at that relatability, not just the science and the study and our master's degree and our doctor, that stuff is part of this process, but just that relatability, just that I've walked this path too, or similar, right? Where it's like, goodness gracious, I didn't even know this was this and that was that. And I think parents, they need to feel that from us, so that when we then say, okay, here's the science and here's the steps, they know that we're coming from a place of, just having walked it, right? And still feeling it, still today. So anyways, love you. Thank you for going through this.
No, it's definitely something, because I definitely felt like I missed that bond with him by not breastfeeding. There was a lot of mom guilt there too. Especially when I had to stop, because the pups it just wouldn't stop.
For sure.
Every time I would pump, and I remember I was in the pediatrician's office and I was crying, and she's a rock star too. She's breastfed all 4 of her children. Like, she's old school Greek. Like, she looked at me and she goes, "You did everything you could, and it's time to just let it go. And you need to, do formula now, and that's okay." Like, I wish I would have known about, milk banks and stuff like that.
Right.
But, I just felt like it was the best, I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't being a great mom, and it was the best case scenario. But
heck yeah,
I think that was why I was determined with my second. He was breastfed till he was like 18 months.
Yep. Yeah, it is, man. These firstborn kiddos are just, we should have given them all of the same middle name, Resilience, because they are firstborn kiddos. So they are walking the path alongside of us. It's like, first time we're doing this job here, kiddo. We tell that to Addison all the time. Like, we're very transparent. We're like, hey pal, hey bud, you came first. So if you see X, Y, and Z happening for kid number 3 and number 4, just know that, we've got some reps here.
Yeah, I mean, he, I didn't think anything of it, in my training and, schooling, it was, it's okay if you could, it's great to breastfeed. It's okay to formula feed. They're going to be fine. Like, I wish in education they went deeper than just surface level of things.
Good point.
And while I appreciate the surface level, it needs to be more. And that is our fault as practitioners, that we don't take it that extra step to go that extra deep in that education. So if somebody would have said, you could formula feed, but here are some alternative and differences and other things that you could do, that's more in depth and understanding. Or I might have toughed it out a little bit longer, or, I would have adjusted or changed something. And I think that's one of the things that I've always learned from this too.
That's genius. What you just said, deserves a rewind, because it's real true. I think sometimes maybe the idea of staying superficial, I think it comes from 2 things. One, conventional medicine, conventional education just doesn't really know. They purport to be experts, but it's pretty vanilla. It's pretty surface level. I love that term. You nailed it. And then 2, maybe some of it is just like, oh, it's protective of our emotions. And that's the dance we walk all the time with our work, right? With Perfect Storm. When you're the first person to walk a mom and a dad back through the case history and shine the light on stuff that really did matter that everybody else dismissed, that's not a fun job. I would definitely have I'd prefer a lot of other jobs than that one, because you have to really use the right tone and the right affect. And when someone knows, even if they still have to choose, birth intervention would be this. I still have to choose this intervention for other real reasons. I still have to stop breastfeeding for other real reasons for my health. That conversation still needs to go deeper. Your words are beautiful and brilliant there, to be able to say, hey, and as such, that may increase the likelihood of A. So what we strongly recommend is you do B and C now to support additionally. And you can do it in a non-doomsday, oh no, this is going to happen, there's nothing you can do about it. There's tons that can be done to offset. And again, that I think is just missing in the vast majority of practitioner conversations with patients, because maybe it's just more comfortable to avoid it, right? But we call that the art of preparation, and really saying, hey,
tough to have those in-depth conversations with people, or realize the woulda, shoulda, couldas too. I think, and maybe it's me too, having that mom guilt. My dad always says it's that the Jewish mom guilt. And I think, reflecting, I think that's kind of why I really took this and ran with it. And in this life, because there was, when my son did regress, and I had a couple crunchy mom friends, and one happened to be a nurse, and she was leading me with breadcrumbs. She was gentle about things. She was, she knew how I felt about modern medicine and stuff. And, if my kid had an ear infection, he got antibiotics, because why not? So she led me with breadcrumbs. And when I started going into Facebook groups with other parents, and I started researching and learning, I was like, I got angry. I got real angry. And I kind of felt like, especially when your kid regresses or your kid gets diagnosed with autism, there's like a grieving process. It's like a death. And I know that sounds really morbid, but it's like you're kind of grieving the loss of a child that you thought you knew and is now not that child. And that's a hard reality for a parent who you think you know your child inside and out. And it can be really, it can be hard to deal with that. And I kind of felt like I lost my kid in that instance. My kid went from talking and smiling and pointing and looking at me to looking straight through me and not saying a single word, and walking every day like he was a zombie. So I think when I started researching and learning a lot of this information and about biomedical and the damages of all of the things, I would come home every day and tell my husband about the 6 or 10 research articles I read, and I would just go off on tangents. And then finally he looked at me, he was like, I can't take this anymore. He's like, you need to go do something with this information. He's like, start a Facebook group, start a podcast. I don't care. But he's like, every dinner is the same thing. And he's like, I physically can't handle it anymore.
So his combusted frustration was the catalyst to you being the badass you are now. What? See, guys, frustrated husbands who just can't take it anymore can change the world. Okay, that's what we're here for.
And I totally could understand. Like, I would come home and for like an hour, just like, but and he's not medical. I love my husband to get death, but he's not medical. Yeah. So for him, it was just kind of like, okay. Sure. Oh, makes sense. Okay. I understand. Like, so I started a Facebook group. Awesome. And that's where I was sharing everything. And it just kept going. I would share research. I would share Keegan's story and what we were doing and his improvements and progress. And then people started reaching out to me and they were like, I need help. What do you do? Obviously what you're doing is working. What do I do? So when I first started, it was like helping a lot of parents for free, just kind of navigating, because I was still navigating. I was trying to find someone to work with. I was trying to find, understand these tests and, and it just kind of, it gave me that outlet of, turning my anger and rage and fear and, everything. And it gave me a bigger purpose.
Wow.
And, I always tell Keegan, he's like my silver lining. Like, what happened to him is so incredibly unfortunate, and it is still hard to deal with and talk about. I'm getting a little.
Yes, it is.
But, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him.
Yeah.
And, he's my everything, and it's still hard to be that parent and know what had happened and be able to carry on with your life and just be like, this is a silver lining. I'm helping other families, but God, why couldn't I have this knowledge back then to help him during that time? Yeah. So
and Keegan is that for you. Keegan is that for your family. And what a story, what an existence, what a calling that Keegan is that for now. You'll never be able to count them. You'll never, because a lot of them reach out and do get your junk, but a lot of them just are in your group, have been in your group, pulled amazing things from your
Yeah.
group. And maybe they're not so chatty. Maybe they're not the mom and dad who reaches out and connects directly, but they take action and they take action. And all of the catalyst and all the spark and all of the real start to those miracles for so many families was Keegan. So I want to pull some stuff because we know that we're going to find people with this podcast that are at various steps in this story, right? Themselves that you've gone through. And so before we get to where things are now, I kind of want to go back and pull a moment or two out of time and tap into your heart and tap into your brain, especially because you do have that incredible research, science, strategic brain here, Greer. So where, when you first started studying, when you were on 6 to 8 tangents per day? I love that. I feel like I actually can hit that quota. I'm absolutely positive I go on at least 6 to 8 tangents per day. And I haven't slowed down. So when you were in this research phase, this search for answers, that's why we say hope answers help, right? So we're going, the answers is the middleman there where we want to find this. We share those science, we share the research, we share that stuff all the time on here and on the website. Where did you first, or when did you first, and how did you first, kind of multiple questions woven into one. When did you find out that conventional medicine and what they were saying about autism was not true? Meaning it's genetic. We don't know what it is. We don't know what's causing it. It's all genetic or primarily genetic, and environment has little influence. Because you were taught that would be the truth. You found out it's not. When, where, how did you find out that it's not?
Keegan was about a little before he was 3.5. We went to a geneticist and we did gene mapping. And I remember he was over 3.5. So because his little brother was just born. And I remember somebody talking about his little brother was born with mouth ties. He was born with lip, tongue, and cheek buccal ties. So he had 4 mouth ties. And I was having issues with lactation. So I had a lactation consultant come over, and that's where she found it. And she was like, well, this is why you're having so many difficulties. He was still eating, but it hurt me because he wasn't getting a good suck. So, she said, well, this is related to like MTHFR and stuff. So I went down a little tangent there. So when we went to the geneticist and we were talking, I said, I also want to test him for MTHFR. I kid you not, the geneticist turned around and looked at me. He goes, what's the point? He has autism. So what's the point of testing him for MTHFR?
Oh, dear.
And I just kind of like looked at him and I was like, okay. Like, I just thought that was a random like thing to say to somebody. So he must have taken, I felt so bad for Keegan because he was so little, and they must have taken like 20 vials of blood. And then I remember he was like running down the hallway, and I was like, stop running. I feel like you're going to pass out from all the blood that they took. So I remember they called me, the assistant called me. She was like, hey, Greer. She's like, it's so-and-so from the geneticist. She's like, I just want to let you know everything came back normal. So, no need to follow up. And well, you can follow back up with your developmental pediatrician. And I was like, wait, what?
I was
like, what do you mean?
For that.
Oh, what do you mean everything was normal? I'm so confused. That was like, I hung up the phone and I was like, okay, now I just felt like everything I had learned, everything, like I just said, that makes 0 sense. I'm so confused now. I was like, I literally think that for the next few days I was in it was like a weird thought process of just, everything that I knew and thought about autism, and it was genetic or a genetic abnormality. I was convinced that my son was going to have some type of genetic abnormality. I was convinced.
Okay. So timeline wise, he really started to turn into regression around 19 months, right?
19 months. Yep.
And then this genetic testing was at what age?
About 3.5.
Okay. So you, for that timeline before that, you had still really been convinced that there was something genetic, right?
Yeah. When he regressed, everyone told me, from his early intervention therapist to the pediatrician, to the developmental pediatrician. We had a horrible first developmental pediatrician appointment. And I remember she was like, I said, well, why did he regress? Like, he was 19 months. Like, I have videos, like he was talking, like looking, like I don't, like how did, like, I've never heard of this regression. Like for what we learned was autism was a developmental delay since birth. So they just didn't meet milestones. They were delayed. And she looked at me, she shrugged her shoulders. She's like, this is just how autism, presents itself now.
I was wondering what they said, because that's my favorite. Okay, it's like my least favorite, most favorite question to ask in those conversations, because I'm rarely Socratic, Greer, because I love to talk and I love to teach. So I have a hard time shutting up and not just letting it rip. But whenever I'm in, but I do love to be Socratic. And everybody please out there listening, please don't judge me. This is just a good way to get them to learn how just like, are you listening to yourself? They are. The more advanced I go, when I talk to developmental pediatrician, neurologists, and everything else, I end up going very slow in the beginning of those conversations and being very Socratic. And I will ask them to be like, hey, explain this to me. And that's my favorite one. Will you please explain regressive autism to me? If it's genetic, bad luck, is there some stopwatch inside the DNA code that for Keegan, that stopwatch was set to 19 months, and that's when this supposed genetic pre-placed bomb was just going to go off into his genetic code? Like, what the heck? You could have been hungover, passed out in genetics class, and because we all had to take it, right? And learn that that's not how genetics work. And so it's wild how much they are still beholden to that just false science. And it's not even in the stratosphere of making sense, which is why you as a parent, who also was doubled down as a well-educated parent, was looking at that and going, yeah, no. Right?
Well, I started questioning it early on, but here was the thing is my family and everyone said the things that I really regret not listening to that mom gut is everyone told me I needed to take myself out of the equation because I am mom and I cannot be a practitioner.
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
I really regret listening to people who said that to me and my family. And I know that they had all the best intentions. Right. I really do. I don't, but I should have listened to my mom gut.
Okay.
It does not steer you wrong.
How do you do this? So now you've had that real life lesson. Same with us. We talk about that like, the PX Docs platform is the mom gut all in platform, right? That'd be a weird tagline, but somehow we can sleuth that out, right? And do it. So like, that's what I've learned clinically. And I still read all that research every single day. I've got my Google alerts turned to this and that and everything else. Always will. Always reading research. Can't wait for new stuff to come out. But the one that I've never seen research, because I don't know how you would, that has the most accuracy by far in my clinical career is mom gut. Like, the more we lean into it, the better results we get in partnership with our parents. So jumping ahead, going from story to all the way ahead for just a second on this very important thing. When you're working with your patients and you're working with people that are coming in to get your incredible help, have you found a way to tap into that? Oh, I don't know how to ask this, Greer. Have you almost found a way to tap into that almost procedurally? Like, have you built that into your clinical processes? And if so, can you please share how? Because I think very few practitioners do that, and it's the missing cheat code to results.
So a lot of the time, so I think this is just how I've always worked with families is when I'm working and talking to them, I give them a platform to talk openly to me.
Yeah.
And once I start asking some probing questions, it's kind of like a floodgate opens. And then they're like, you have to, I think part of the problem is when you go to speak to a doctor, they very rarely respond to you when you talk to them. Like, some of them are chatty, but some of the times they're just going to come in and be like, okay, what's the problem? Okay, this is this. And the way they speak to you is almost like I'm telling you what we're doing and that's it.
Like a machine.
So you kind of, like you don't get that opportunity to kind of go, but, so I give my families this ability to, when they come and we're talking, to just kind of, let's throw around ideas. And there are times where I'll ask my parent, do you feel that this would work for your kid? Whether it be a supplement or, I come up with ideas and I kind of pose it as a question. I think this would be a great idea. Like I had a family the other day and I was like, have you ever gone to a chiropractor? And they were like, no. I said, well, I think your kiddo's nervous system is really, really tight. And we started talking about that. And then all of a sudden it was like a light bulb went off and they were like, oh my God, yes. Like this is happening. This is happening. This is happening. I said, I think you should go to a chiropractor they're like, oh, we have one. It's like a best friend. And I'm going, well, you need to go, you know, like go see your best friend.
And make sure your best friend is trained by the PXX. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, it's kind of like that lead a horse to water. Like I'm never putting my parents in a position where I feel like I'm trying to be an authority figure. I'm an assistant. I'm a helper. And I always remind them that I work for them.
You're too. If we could just add one more degree to you and turn you into a chiropractor, man, oh man, could we use you? Because I think I maybe snuck this into the podcast one other time, but it's a perfect place to share this story. When we put our certification program together with Life University, which is just incredible, and this is a university, an accredited, real university. So, you have to really have your stuff together to get a university to put their seal of approval on your certificate course. And in the rest of the world, it's kind of a funky thing. Like a lot of natural health certifications out there are kind of like, you're certified by me, and so this is, you and I would love this chat because we love our education, our training, right? And we've gone through it, so we know the value of it. So anyways, where I'm going is, when I built this whole curriculum, of course, it's all about the science. It's all about the clinical protocols. I have 20 hours, and I actually wanted to do more. Our other program has even more, 20 hours of communication training. And when I went to send it to the board to get approval, they redlined it and crossed it out and said, no, this is clinical. You can't have communication training. It can only be science. It can only be evidence. It can only be adjusting. It can only be diagnostic, right? And I totally understood. I was very empathetic to the board. And I actually flew down there and I gave a presentation. I said, I'm not going into partnership with you guys if communication isn't at least 1/4 of my training, because I can't teach my providers how to find the answers that they need, because they're not going to show up in the paperwork. They're not just going to show up sticking out on the scans. And we have great technology. We have great paperwork. But moms and dads have the data deep down in their gut that we need to find. And so I need to teach, because we don't get communication training in chiropractic. I actually think in medical school, they get communication training on how to be awful at it. It's like somebody who writes freaking, thriller movies and like just fear-based. They must come in and be like, here's how we're going to train you. You have to put everybody in a severe state of fight or flight and tell them it's going to be horrible. Okay, got that? Okay, now move on.
Yeah.
So long story short, it is essential. That's the cheat code. That's how you find it. You ask probing questions. You give them a platform. And parents are shocked, aren't they? They're like, wait a minute. Are you listening to me right now? And we're like, we are. Go on. I need this. I work for you. We're in partnership with you. And it's just so, the healing actually starts right there, by the way. Like you can literally see mom and dad heal, and then their healing helps facilitate the child's healing, because finally it's like, oh, we're going to find it now because it's in there. Because they've been with the child every step of the way, emotionally, neurologically, physically.
Well, but they've also been told a lot of that information that we need is useless. So it's like they have already pushed down a lot of that information that is essential for us to do our job. And they've been called that's like poo-poo, that doesn't mean anything. Like there was one time I had to go, Keegan was 3 or so for his developmental pediatrician appointment. And I was talking to her about his gut, and I was like, his gut is just horrible. He's so constipated. And she's like, well, he needs Miralax. Just put him on Miralax. And I'm like, but even though I wasn't as crunchy as I am now, but I'm like, but it says not to use in kids over age 17. Like even I learned that that's not supposed to be used like for long term. She's like, it's fine. And I'm like, no, can we do something else? Like, I think there's something else really wrong. And so she put in the notes, like, parent refused Miralax, states it's not to be given over 17. It does not follow advice from doctor. And I was like, oh my God.
You'll blame the parents. Yeah, that's.
I'm like, you're not even listening to me.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of pre-programming, let's use that as our segue to my next question, because I don't get to talk about this with too many people either, my friend, but you know it inside now. So we will get to the nervous system, which I know is your newfound love. I know you just can't get enough of the nervous system and nervous system regulation and optimization and everything else. So we'll get there. But also, when you get done understanding that it's not just this black and white genetic code and bad luck, especially with regression, you do open up the box to epigenetics. And I know you understand epigenetics very well. So my first question is, when you're explaining this to parents in a general sense, what is epigenetics, and what does a parent need to know about epigenetics in order to understand, A, this is maybe where some of these challenges came from in this complex, but also simple interplay between environment and genetic code. And then B, okay, now that we know this, we can actually use this going forward to help heal our child, right? So epigenetics, let it rip.
So with we have about 27,000 genes, everybody, and we pull half from our parents. We don't know what we pull, and it's very interesting because for the longest time, I thought I was Irish because I looked more like my mother, and then I did my genetics and found out I am pretty much mostly Ashkenazi Jewish, so which was a really big shocker for me. So when you dive into your genetics and you start understanding how your genetics can play a role, genetics can be a very fascinating thing, but it's still in an early infancy stages. We're still learning how to connect the dots with everything, and it's a very fascinating field, I think. Most everybody, especially listening to this, will hear about MTHFR, and we're going to use that as an example. Not everyone is going to have a positive MTHFR. There's other genes that can play a role, but we know MTHFR can help with detoxification and, in general with just, B12, folate, things like that. It's a very important genetic factor. Now, if I had two kids and we, two different kids from, we'll just say your kid and my kid, they both have the exact same genetic factors, but you live in a different place than I do. Maybe my area is more toxic than your area. It's not the genetics that are sometimes the problem too. It's also environment. So that's why we have this saying, genetics load the gun and the environment pulls the trigger. And that's why I think there's a lot of people who hate epigenetics and talking about MTHFR because just because you have that genetic variant doesn't necessarily mean that you're already doomed for doomsday.
Nailed it.
It does not mean that.
Yeah.
But if you have these genetic factors and then your environment, your gut health, like all these other things that are negatively impacting the child, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yes.
And that's where we start to see these symptoms come out. So, it drives me nuts when I hear like turning genetics on and off. And there's no such thing as that. We have our genetics. They are what they are. And then for instance, like Keegan, one of the main issues of why he had so much gut health is because he carries one of the celiac genetic markers. He is 95% going to develop celiac disease at some point in time in his life. And his gluten sensitivities have always been off the chart.
For sure.
Does he have celiac disease right this second? No. But we would like to prevent that from happening, so he is on a gluten-free diet.
That's the best part of this, right? When you learn, typically that's kind of the pathway I'll take this up. You learn, okay, well, here's how it can go bad, we'll call it. Here's how it can go haywire. Well, guys, everybody listening, that's actually the good news. And you have to be able to get to the other side of the coin to get to the good news. Because the moment you learn, this is what I've always said, by studying chronic illness and autism and all these different perfect storm challenges in kids, you do it 180, you do the opposite, and you become empowered to know what creates health. Because if that creates sickness, the opposite of it creates health. That's literally the truth. If that creates susceptibility, the other side of it creates resiliency. If that creates inflammation, the other side of it creates anti-inflammatory effects, right? So what's so powerful about epigenetics is even when you find, we've got this marker and we've got that marker, you're now armed with information you need to put these healthy endeavors because you have control. The most important thing, medicine, you said it earlier perfectly. They want control because they have said genetics has control. There's nothing you can do. You need us to now take control with medications, with everything else, because that's how it works. No, it's not. We're not a freaking machine that got programmed for good or bad. We are highly adaptable, highly resilient, and things can heal and things can change, which is why your page has literally got the word healing in it, right? And so I always like to tell this. My first mentor, I had literally studied I'd met Bruce Lipton while I was in chiropractic school. My very first week of being in chiropractic school, the pioneer of epigenetics comes in, does a 2-hour lecture in this massive old, what's called Lyceum Hall. And I remember thinking, I have zero clue what he's talking about, but one day I'll figure it out because I just could tell he was right. I could go back to the gut instinct, kind of bringing our whole conversation together in this story. I knew in my gut that what he was saying is the science that must be why God sent me to chiropractic school. I'm going to learn what that man knows, because I just graduated with a genetics and molecular biology degree. And my gut the whole time getting that undergrad degree was like, yeah, no, like this isn't mathing out, right? And so my first mentor, Dr. Cody, you'll love this story, and you can share this with patients going forward too. Their first kiddos, his first marriage, Dr. Cody's no longer with us, but I was still figuring out epigenetics, and then the story of his kiddo just really cemented it. They had two twins. They were only able to adopt one. So these were they're twins. So their genetics were ideal. But the way it worked out for this family, one child went with them and another child went with another family that lived about an hour away. Dr. Cody, being a chiropractor, he was as crunchy and chiro as it gets. So the child was adjusted and his nervous system regulated from the time they got him. He was not vaccinated. They lived ridiculously healthy. The food they put in that kiddo's body was all organic and all incredible. They lived with an incredible mindset. They lived with faith, right? They lived this crazy, healthy, epigenetic, influencing to the positive direction lifestyle. And unfortunately, the sister went and lived in a very toxic household, toxic in every way you could ever imagine, fully medically dependent, all the challenges. And so that child never, ever actually even made it through education and was chronically sick, juvenile diabetes, juvenile arthritis, sensory spectrum issues, from the exact identical genetics to John, the kiddo who was crazy healthy, graduated college, went into the Army, and now serves our country. And so that's just one story, right? But those are the stories that I would study in undergrad when I was on my journey to say, it's not genetics. Autism isn't genetics. Heart disease, there's a susceptibility when you find these things out, but susceptibility can be spun on its head to readiness, to preparation, to say, okay, well, now I know this celiac gene is in there. We're going to make sure Keegan knows. We're going to make sure our family knows, and we're going to take care of it in this way. Okay, epigenetics, that's some fun science. I think we got time for one more chapter of science. When did you get turned on to subluxation, dysregulation, dysautonomia, and not just chiropractic as a whole, but nervous system focused chiropractic?
It was really interesting because I had a couple patients talk to me about it. And I remember I was talking to Keegan, and this was like the most random thing in the entire world. He goes, remember that when I fell off the bed when I was little? And I was like, buddy, you never fell off the bed. He goes, yeah, I was little and I fell off the bed. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember going to my husband. I was like, remember that time I was laying on the bed. You had Keegan. Keegan must have been 2. And they were rolling around and he fell and he rolled off the bed, but he landed on the side. Cause I remember like having like a coronary cause your kid fell off a bed. But I remember he landed on the side of his arm. He didn't hit his head or anything like that. But he remembered that. And I thought that was the most freakiest thing to remember because he was like 2. Right. Like he was like 8 or 9 or maybe like 7 or 8 when he told me that story. And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, does he have like trap trauma? Like that's where I started. Well,
he also he kind of would have been in the thick of his storm at that time, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the fact that he remembered it was pretty crazy to me. Because, there are things that he comes out with now when he was in when I call it the trenches, like the trenches of autism during that time, he remembers a lot of those things. And it was really interesting because I always just thought he wasn't paying attention, but he really was. So it was kind of one of those things where I started researching and I found like, safe and sound protocol with like music and stuff like that. And I started learning more about like vagus nerve and using vibrating plates and primitive reflexes. And I was like, oh my God, like there's like this whole other world of medical interventions that I knew nothing about. So we wound up doing like safe and sound protocol. We've done brain tap. We've done Malillo method. Like we did all of that, which definitely was like, I kind of felt like, cause Keegan was always very OCD rigid. a
Yeah,
lot of
very,
things.
very sympathetic, sensitive, right? Kind of living on
Right.
that wound up part. Yeah.
Like, yeah, if he had to sit on a specific seat every day and then you moved him, it was like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? Like, I can't move. Like, that's my it's like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory. Like,
Yep.
that's my
For
spot.
sure.
So it really, once we did a lot of these things that worked on the nervous system and just primitive reflexes, it was like a whole different kid. He
Awesome.
just relaxed. He felt, you could feel like this, like, tension release, I guess I want to say, where he just didn't seem so like, I need to do it this, like
Yeah.
that all really just kind of, he's matured, he's grown, and he's just,
So if you go from Keegan's story with that hypersensitive, rigid nervous system, kind of as his hardwiring previously, and now you translate that into the case histories, because again, now we know awesomely how you take on folks. You really take the time to listen and go through it. Net ballpark, what percentage of kids do you find pretty much right away you can tell your kiddo, this kiddo's nervous system is stuck in sympathetic, hypersensitive, and they're going to need that kind of work? Where would you land that number?
probably 80% or more.
Yeah, for sure, right? It's really, and it's usually a lead horse challenge, right? Like it's one of the keys you need to turn, because there's a sequence to getting sick, so there's a sequence to healing. It's probably double question on that, or kind of question within a question. Do you tend to find that that's something that really needs to be addressed up front to help open up the pathways to a lot of other healing?
I would love to say yes. The problem is some of these parents are brand spanking new to this.
Great point.
And it's a lot to take in.
Yep.
It is
Yep.
This world is huge. I mean, I'm still learning about this world.
Oh,
I'm
it's
sure
really
you are
something.
too. Like, I mean, I turn the corner and I get asked, have you heard of this supplement or
Yep.
this scan? And it's just like, no, I'm sure, I'd have to do some digging. Like it's a very big world. So I always work with my families on the basis of 3 components. So anytime I'm talking to them and we're having a consultation, I'm giving them 3 things to work on when they leave, because it is just so much information. It is on system overload. I mean, one of the biggest things my parents will respond back, like even if I give them like a supplement protocol, is like, I'm feeling overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot for a parent to, this is new to them. So now they're on information overload. They're trying to navigate testing and, everything else. So we kind of do it in baby steps. But it's definitely something that does get addressed. And I sneak it in,
Well,
when
there's
I
probably-
can.
Yeah. Do you find times too where maybe sometimes even as you're going, which is, by the way, you already know this, but we're the biggest fan in the world of that. The basics, there's the flipping Pareto principle is true pretty much wherever you apply it, that 20% of what you do, which in this context, we would say, okay, these are the basics, these are the baby steps. It actually is the real catalyst for 80% of the healing. And we're in this weird paradox of time where we have so much access to all of these things, and they tend to keep getting, I'll use the word fancier and fancier. That doesn't always mean they're better. The basics, I reserve the right to be wrong one day in my career, but I continue to see the basics matter most, especially because healing is sequential and there's a whole process to it. The basics matter most first, right? That's a t-shirt for both of us, right? And how we do stuff. We would wear that shirt proudly and be like, listen to this is what it is. But then sometimes you get the basics going, you get momentum going, and a kiddo will hit a plateau. And that's all, or they'll kind of hit like a healing crisis a little bit, right? And kind of be in this stuck point where things were moving forward and now you kind of hit this stuck point. That's almost always subluxation, nervous system dysregulation, right? It's kind of like that cheat code. So what's so exciting is we get to meet a lot of families on that part of their journey, right? They maybe have already done some really great things in the biomedical functional world. They definitely have exhausted the conventional world, and they've gone to some lengths or great lengths, and we get to be that super speed healing, because when you unlock the nervous system, and you unlock the nervous system of a family who is living naturally, healthy, diets changed, macronutrients going in, getting chemicals out of their life, adding supplements to help the body work better. That's a freaking awesome thing, that I didn't get to have in the beginning of my career, honestly, right? Nobody knew anything in the beginning of my career. I felt like, holy cow. And I made the biggest mistake, Greer. I was like, okay, you got 4.5 hours because I have 333 things for you to do starting today, not just 3. And learn that lesson, right, as a clinician to not overload.
You know what's funny is I do get a lot of clinicians because I do train practitioners too in doing my method and working with families. And I had a naturopathic doctor consult with me, and she goes, I feel like she's like, I'm trying to explain this to a patient, especially epigenetics. They were doing genetics testing and everything else. And I was like, oh, girlfriend, like you
not on the first date.
Like when you meet a family and they're brand new and you're trying to go over these results with them, like you have to break it down. Like you have to give them small bite-sized pieces they can go and research on their own, because that's what parents are going to do, because we're great at that. We do better research than the FBI. We're going to go and research every single marker, everything that's wrong. And then we're going to get like overwhelmed. So that's why I tell my families, hold off on the Google research.
Yep.
I will give you exactly the main points that I want you to focus. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, by all means, I'm more than willing to go down a rabbit hole with you, but it needs to be directed to what I want you to research that's based off your kids' test results, because that's what I did when MTHFR was like the thing. I went down a rabbit hole. I spent like a month and I was like, well, this is like a waste of time.
Yep. Because for what your kid needed in that moment probably wasn't that, right? And that's the key. What does my child need? And that's what makes the Facebook groups and Google helpful / full of side effects, because everybody's kid, I know this is going to sound like the most cliche thing ever that we're talking about here, but everybody's kid is very uniquely different. There is patterns, there are similarities that we can learn from studies and from our patient bases, but the way you do it, the way we do it is there is an individualization that is everything. That is everything. And so when we're building care plans and we're starting with the basics and we're building out this whole plan, it is very customized to that child. And the results of it are based upon the customization, right? Versus the generalization. So parents, that's what you're looking for. Oh my goodness, the most out of a provider is, can you tell that they have the experience to go into the testing? So us, it's the insight scans. You, it's your testing in the labs. Can they really do it to not just cookie cutter and do the same thing they do for everybody, but is this actually where this clinician is pulling out customized, personalized data for my child to line the ducks up and say, this first for your kiddo, then that, then that. That is a provider that our kids need. That's the provider your kids deserve. So
I always tell anyone, like, if your provider literally hands you a sheet and it looks like a cookie cutter, the same thing for everybody, then you need to run, because
do you know how many I've seen where they forget to change the kid's name? They literally print it out, and whatever their assistant or whoever, neuropsych, actually big freaking level 3, supposedly, yet they have a special parking lot for all the white horses they ride in on, right? The neuropsych. Do you know that special hospitals, they have white horse parking? Okay. You'd think it'd be like a Porsche or a Land Rover, but it's actually white horses. Okay. That's a bad joke, but I feel like it's underneath there, like a stable. And so I've read these neuropsych evaluations, and I would say 20 of them, they forgot to change the name. Because it's just a word processor thing. And they're like, oh, your child has autism. It's genetic. There's nothing you can do. Here's your printout. And parents will be like, my child's name is not this. They just didn't even freaking take the time to do that. I mean, it's criminal. Okay. So speaking of time, darn it, time. I don't like time. In this context, will you come back? Because I didn't get to this question, but I have it for you. And I know we chatted about it. That's why I was so excited to learn from you. Lots of people want to detox their kids. Lots of providers want to go. Speaking of baby steps or not baby steps, that ain't a baby step. So will you come back and can we get into that another? Because I don't think that's a 5-minute thing. I think that's a whole episode thing.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I really trust you on that. I really trust you and a very select few on the process of doing that, when to do that, when not to do that, how to do that. A lot of people just go, guns a blazing. and practitioners, not talking parents, like practitioners. And so, okay, so we're gonna table that one. We're gonna come back. We're gonna do a round 2 with you, Greer. What I would love, most importantly, is it happened today, my friend. God is never messing around with my schedule. It seems to be just daily. How it's like, that's wild how this lines up. I have 2 or 3 kiddos today whose families are so in need of biomedical healing, so in need of a consultation and care and guidance from a provider. I am sending them to you, is what I'm telling you. So how does, I know how to make that action, and it's going to be happening full speed. Get ready. Buckle up, Buttercup. Because these kids that we care for here locally need you, and they can connect with you virtually. And so I'm sending parents this way. How do other parents come into your community? How do they come by your care? Because I want them there.
Yeah. So everything is Biomedical Healing for Kids. That's my Instagram, my website, and my Facebook group is Biomedical Healing for Kids. My Facebook group is just a bunch of parents that, have questions. I'm pretty active. So if you ask questions, a lot of people tag me in questions and ask me about supplements and products and stuff like that. My Instagram, I love to share great content. Right now I'm doing giveaways for the holiday. Like I really try to give really, good content for everybody so that they can learn from me as well. And my website is the same, and I'm actually launching a membership soon. So even if you don't live in the United States or you're unsure, you can definitely join my membership, which I actually help parents in that membership, where we're going to help rebalance the system and actually learn how to detox safely and effectively.
Ba-bam. Ba-bam. Awesome. Well, in those channels and in those places, you will have PX Docs patients and PWC patients coming in. Get ready for a flood of membership requests, homies. We run 2 Facebook groups, and I mainly for other providers, so that we can get enough in our network to train to get the information out. So I know how much work it is to literally help and serve there from people all over the world and all hours of the night, right? So we really do appreciate you. It's a lot to keep up with, while also being the rockstar mom you are, while also, just doing all the things that you do. The wrestling story now makes sense. Okay. That, and I didn't know that story, but as soon as you said it at the start of this one, I was like, yeah, that makes sense. I wouldn't mess with her. And I'm sure with all the healing you've done now, your injury is healed and you could just take me out in 2 seconds. I did grow up in Iowa though. Okay. So a little bit of a wrestling world. I didn't do it, but I feel
Dan
like
Gable,
I could.
yep.
Yeah, a little bit there. I'm solid, okay? All right. So I don't know how many times during the podcast I said I love you, but holy heck do we. We been in this world a long time, and I even with this podcast, we're choosy in a way that I think is really important for families, so that people aren't getting vanilla, generic. We talked about it before we started recording, right? That sometimes things in this platform, Instagram summits, seminars, sometimes providers can be a little 101. And what we know parents of today's generation are looking for is double PhD, DC, master's degree, help me out there, not just with science and education, but they're really looking for people who will walk the path with them from the trenches through the storm to the other side. And those of us that have literally walked that as a parent and a patient, we know the steps. So you know the steps, and we couldn't be more grateful and more appreciative of you for all the hard work you do for our communities. And we will be here to cheer you on. We will be here to support you in every single way we ever can. And let's keep doing this together. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great to me.
All right, buddy. Talk soon. Round 2, detox safely, effectively. We'll stay tuned. Okay. We'll get that booked and we'll do that again. All right. Thanks, Greer. Have a wonderful day.